If you're using AI to build your own tools or your own products, what is the best programming language or framework to build those tools in? In other words, what kind of code should you be asking the AI to write for you? Well, I've been giving this a lot of thought recently, and I happen to think that Ruby on Rails and building tools using AI is sort of a match made in heaven. And it's weird because I don't hear a lot of people talking about this, especially my fellow builders in the Ruby on Rails community. But if you think about it, there are a number of reasons why Ruby on Rails is uniquely optimal when it comes to building with AI. And I'm going to get into the reasons behind that. Now, I'm a bit biased, of course, because I'm a longtime full stack designer and developer building with Ruby on Rails. I've been building Rails apps way before AI came along. But I really do think that there are a few unique advantages to building apps with Ruby on Rails if you're building with AI. And this is especially true if you are new to building your own tools or your own apps. Maybe you're just learning how to code now that you have the advantage of using AI to speed up your learning curve. I'm going to touch on why Ruby on Rails, again, is a perfect fit in that scenario as well. Now, before we get into it, I want to show you something. Just last night, I was having a conversation with my friend, ChatGPT. It's funny, my kids, 8 and 10 years old, whenever we have a question, they always say, Daddy, why don't you just go ask your friend? And they mean, go ask the AI, right? So, I always like to check my own biases. And, since I am a longtime Ruby on Rails designer and developer, I know that there are other frameworks and languages out there. Probably the most popular today is Next.js and React and that sort of stack. I've dabbled in that. I've also built a thing or two with PHP and Laravel. And years ago, I was pretty heavy into building stuff with WordPress. But, since then, the last 8 years or so, I've really adopted the Ruby on Rails stack. But I went to ChatGPT and I wanted to get a better understanding of what the actual differences and the benefits and the advantages are of, the newer, trendier, more popular way of building things, which is like with Next.js, React, Vercel, and things like that. That's really a topic for another video, another time. But I am going to come back to this conversation throughout this video and just to kind of share a few bits and pieces of it, because I think they're relevant to the question of, is Ruby on Rails really the ideal, optimal stack to build things if you're using AI to build? So again, if we are asking AI to drive the car, what kind of car should it be driving for us? Should it be driving a Rails-based vehicle or something else like a PHP or JavaScript or something else? Well, before we get into my 4 main reasons why I think Ruby on Rails and building with AI is a match made in heaven, let's think about fundamentals here. When we are building tools with AI, meaning you're asking the AI to write code for you, what are some of the things that make relying on AI just not work so well? Like, where does AI or the act of building with AI, where does it start to, fall apart or you run into roadblocks? Well, one thing is, if you're relying on these large language models and you're asking it to write code in a language that is brand new and not very mature, maybe it's only in its version 1 or version 2, maybe it's only really been in active widespread use for like a year or 2 years or something, that means that there isn't a whole lot of information on the internet that can be used to train these large language models. Now, I know that their training materials getting closer and closer to present day, but there still is like a gap. I don't know what it is currently. There's probably a few months of like the latest time in the calendar that could have been used to train LLMs is probably a few months ago. So whatever is like the cutting edge, newest stuff, AI large language models just don't know so well. Or if they know a little like bits and pieces, they're not going to give you the most reliable information. And along those same lines is when we are relying on AI to make a lot of design decisions for us, meaning if there are many, many different ways of building the same thing, which is true of almost anything, but some more than others, if what we're building lacks conventions, and maybe you see where I'm heading with this, the AI can be a little bit unpredictable. And it can even be unpredictable with itself. Like if you ask it to build something one day in a certain way and you ask it to build the same thing the next day, it might give you a very, very different answer if there is not a tried and true and general consensus on the internet or in the world as a whole on like, this is the best way to build this sort of thing, right? That's where AI starts to become very unpredictable and very difficult for us as builders, especially if you're trying to learn to code. If it's telling you to do, this or that thing, you don't even know if that's the tried and true method. But on the flip side, what are the things that make AI and large language models really, really strong and a really, really effective tool for us that we can truly rely on? Like we can really rely on it in professional situations or in a business where we need that reliability, that predictability, and that efficiency to get to the finish line and really trust. This comes down to trust, right? Like how can we get to a point where we are relying on AI to build tools with us in collaboration with us, but we really trust that we are building them in the right way? Well, when there is a wealth of information on the internet going back years and decades, that's of course the training material for large language models. So when there are these really long-standing, mature frameworks like Ruby on Rails, there is just a lot of information out there that has trained the AI, which makes the AI itself, if you want to give it human characteristics, more confident, and that gives us more confidence that, okay, this is what it's sending back to me is trusted information. And again, on the flip side, I think that when we are not really relying on the AI to make strategic design decisions so much, because there's really one most popular or there's really one consensus on the way things should be built. That is where relying on the AI to assemble and do the grunt work and letting us, the human, put in our design strategic spin on things, that is the ideal scenario. Okay, so let's get into the 4 main reasons why I think that Ruby on Rails is a perfect match if you are building with AI. So number 1, and I've already touched on this a little bit, LLMs are really well trained on Ruby on Rails, because Ruby on Rails has been around a really long time. You know what? I'm actually not exactly sure when it was built. So let's ask ChatGPT. When was Ruby on Rails created? 2003. So, DHH, put together the original version of Ruby on Rails, and he's still very heavily involved in it. We're here in 2025, so that's that's over 20 years ago. Of course, it was cutting edge back then, but if we look at Ruby on Rails today, it's on version 8. That means that it is a pretty well established and highly mature framework and ecosystem around Ruby on Rails. And what that means for us when we're using AI to build our own tools and our own apps is that we can put a lot of trust in the fact that these LLMs are very well trained on the Ruby programming language, number 1, the Ruby on Rails framework, and the conventions that come with it. And that brings me to the second main point here. So if you are familiar at all with Ruby on Rails or the whole approach or the philosophy behind Ruby on Rails, there's a saying in the Rails world of developers, convention over configuration. If I look at rubyonrails.org, and if you scroll down and go to read the Rails doctrine, you'll get to this write-up from David Heinemeier Hansson, the creator of Ruby on Rails. And point number 2, convention over configuration. And I'm not going to read this here for you, but the main idea is that it's opinionated. Building apps, building products with Ruby on Rails is an opinionated approach, and Rails itself has been designed with really strong conventions and opinions built into it. Meaning, for most things, when you're building in Ruby on Rails, there is a general consensus around what is the best way to architect or design your code. There are really strong conventions. And if I go back to my conversation that I was having with ChatGPT about comparing what it's like to build in Ruby on Rails, which I'm very familiar with, compared to the stack of using something like Next.js and React and Vercel. It started to really highlight the fact that Rails is very convention oriented, whereas Next.js is much more. You can think of it as like more flexible, but I don't necessarily agree with that. It's just much more configurable. There are many different ways to build and put the pieces of the puzzle together. Now, that's not to say that when you are building with Rails, every app is going to look and feel the same way. That is absolutely not the case, especially on the front end where you can implement your own design and user interface. And that's a big part of what I do, especially with my components library for Rails at instrumental.dev. But here's what that means for us when we are relying on AI to drive the car for us, to build our own tools. It means that when we are asking it to build the tool using a Ruby on Rails-based stack, it's very convention-oriented. And that means that what the AI is giving us can be predictable and consistent. And that's exactly what we want when we are relying on AI to help us build something. That predictability and consistency is really important in a number of ways, right? First of all, we know that that what it's giving us is probably the best way to build something, or at least very close to it. And we know that if we are asking it to build something today and we ask it to build the same thing tomorrow, it's probably going to give us more or less the same output. So the predictability and consistency is a huge benefit. All right, let's roll right into point number 3 here, which of course is Ruby on Rails is super easy to read. And this is really important because, like I was just saying, we know that we can't always trust every line of code or every piece of information that the AI is giving us. If you've been working with AI for a while, then you know that that you have to treat everything with a little grain of salt. So that means you need to be able to actually read what it's giving you. So if you are just learning how to code and maybe you're new to building your own apps and the AI is spitting a bunch of code back at you, most of the time you're probably just hoping that what it's giving you is correct, or it works the way that it should, or that it's architected and designed in the way that it should. Well, if you're asking it to give you Ruby on Rails code, that code is much easier for you to read and understand and reason about, and it's much easier to rework and tweak, or at least learn how to tweak yourself without just asking another prompt or asking it to rewrite it and hope it does a better job next time. Let's go back to my original conversation here that I was having with ChatGPT about the differences in building stuff with Rails versus something like Next.js and React. But the same would be true of like building with PHP, and that is the style of the code. There's a really good section in this conversation. So I started to ask ChatGPT to give me some code samples and help me literally see what the code looks like if we're building a to-do list app using Rails versus building it in something like Next.js. And it started to give me all these code samples, and it started to really confirm my own biases and why I end up sticking with Rails and using that as my my tool of choice. I'm going to skip down to this section. So, okay, here we're setting up a model for a task in a to-do list app. The top part here is Ruby code in a typical Rails app. Class task. We're validating that there's a title, that it is present. That's it. Now compare that to Next.js. Import Prisma client from Prisma client. Const Prisma new like export async function get task return await. Like, what am I reading? This is not English to me. I mean, I'm a developer. I know how JavaScript works, so I know what's going on here. But if you are new to code, this probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And this is actually a relatively simple example. Let's look at some of the views. The views are like the page, the front end page that structures the HTML that the end user will see in their browser. If we're looking at a Rails view, which uses ERB, we've got so you're probably familiar with HTML. This is as close to pure HTML as you can get. This is one of the things that I love about building with Ruby on Rails is that I get to design in HTML and CSS just like I always used to. H1, tasks. Tasks, each task, meaning we're going through a loop of all the tasks. For each task, we want to output the task's title. Super simple, literally 4 lines of code. Next.js, we've got export default function tasks. Bunch of curly braces and parentheses at the same time, And then it says return. And then we've got this like mashup of a little bit of HTML, a little bit of, I think that's JavaScript, and some other like random stuff inserted into the HTML itself. It's just weird. And it's hard to work with, and it's hard to read and understand. Here's another one. All right, here we're setting up the controllers, and the controller sort of like directs where things go. And so in Rails, we're setting up a tasks controller. Index. This is the index view. That's where we want to define a variable called tasks, and that will give us all the tasks. That's it. Next.js, import get tasks from .. // lib Prisma. And then we've got all this stuff here, like export default async function rec res. What do these words mean? Like, what am I looking at, right? If you are new to this, it feels like nonsense, and you just hope that these words fit together and that they work. Of course, it takes years of understanding how JavaScript works to understand what is all happening here. Whereas this, even if you're brand new to building with Rails, you get it. You can just read it and you can reason about with it. Again, this goes back to the core philosophy of Ruby on Rails. It's right here in the middle of the homepage on rubyonrails.org. It's optimized for happiness. Part of the Rails doctrine, optimized for programmer happiness. Just make our lives easier. At the end of the day, we're not trying to write the most clever code, and we're not trying to be cryptic. That's a really bad pattern in the world of programmers and developers. In my opinion, as a product person, our whole goal and the whole philosophy behind building stuff with Ruby on Rails, frankly, and today when we are building with AI, what's our actual goal? It's to build a simple tool that we can use, or build a product that we can sell to customers or ask other people to use. That's the goal. Keep it simple, ship something. And that's what programmer happiness is all about. And that's why building with AI with Ruby on Rails makes it easy, keeps us happy, keeps us productive. We're moving forward. We're building stuff. All right, the last point here, and this sort of ties together all the points that came before it. If your project, where you've been asking AI to help you build your own tool or your own product, if that project is built in Ruby on Rails, then you can rest assured that your project is future-proof. Why does that even matter? What does that even mean for your project to be future-proof? Well, number one is if you are going to continue to maintain and expand and iterate and build upon your app, you want to be able to easily maintain it and easily, tweak it. Again, Ruby on Rails code is easy to read, easy to adapt. But if it's successful and you're bringing in team members, maybe you're hiring a team, maybe you're asking coworkers or partners to work with you on this thing. Another big reason why I chose to build and learn Ruby on Rails in the first place, and this goes back years before AI even came along, is that I knew how well developed of an ecosystem Ruby on Rails is. It's literally a worldwide pool of developers available to hire and bring into my team and collaborate and learn from and partner with. So, if you're using a brand new cutting edge piece of technology or programming language or framework, it might be cool, it might be sexy, might be trendy, but that means that there aren't many people in the world who know it really, really well. That's not the case with Ruby on Rails. So if you start your own product, your own tool with the help of AI, and it's built in Ruby on Rails, you can rest assured that tomorrow, next week, next year, you can easily hire other developers in the world. They can come into your code base and they can see what's going on really, really quickly, because in all likelihood, your app is built using those strong conventions, and any developer can hop into any Ruby on Rails project and understand what's going on and easily make changes. So that could literally mean the difference between, building a prototype with AI, and then when it comes to getting it into prime time, or maybe you have a lot of users starting to use your thing, that could be the difference between needing to go back to the drawing board and completely rebuild your app from scratch because it was not future proof, versus if you have your tool in Ruby on Rails, you don't need to rebuild. You can just keep building on top of it. You can keep adapting it, keep customizing it, because it's built on those conventions, on the strong, firm foundation of a mature framework like Ruby on Rails. So yeah, I think that Ruby on Rails is the most optimal tech stack to be building your own tools and your own apps, especially if you are using AI to help you in the build process. So here is my ask for you. Drop into the comments, and if you have built anything using AI, if you have largely relied on AI to drive the car for you to build your own tool or your own product, drop it into the comments. I want to see what you've built and tell me how it went. Like, what were the biggest challenges or the biggest wins that you were able to achieve by building with AI? And when it comes to building with Ruby on Rails, especially building with Rails and AI, if you have any specific questions or things that you would like to see me dive deeper into in future videos, this is a whole theme that I'm really interested and excited about. And I'm trying to learn, the best things to teach on this channel, especially in this theme of building with AI and building with Rails. So I would love to hear those questions and requests. Hope to hear from you soon. Thanks.